All right, so we're diving deep into medical preparedness today. Got a mountain of resources here, which is amazing, but who actually has time to read through all of this?
That's where we come in. We're going to break it all down, give you the need-to-know info, and help you build a plan that actually works without spending a fortune.
Exactly. So we all know that feeling when you need a Band-Aid and your first aid kit is, well, a little sad.
Yeah, those pre-made kits are great for a paper cut, but we're aiming a bit higher than that. We're talking about being prepared for serious situations.
So what are the essentials we should be stocking up on? Like beyond the basics?
Well, you always need a good foundation, sterile gauze, antibiotic ointment, medical tape. Those are your go-tos. And don't forget pain relief.
Those do seem pretty basic. What are things people might not think of right away?
You'd be surprised. One thing that often gets overlooked is sterile gloves. You always want to protect yourself when you're helping someone, even if it's not your injury.
You're so right. I have totally been guilty of that myself. It's easy to forget in the heat of the moment.
Exactly. It's all about building those good habits now. Which brings us to something that might seem a little intimidating, but it's crucial. Trauma care.
Okay, trauma care. I'm ready. What do we need to know?
Pressure dressings are a must-have for controlling bleeding, and you should always have at least one tourniquet in your kit.
A tourniquet. I'll be honest, those kind of freak me out.
I get it, but they're designed to be easy to use, and there are tons of resources to teach you how. Trust me, knowing how to use one could save a life.
All right, you've convinced me. Learning to use a tourniquet is officially on my to-do list.
Don't worry, we'll definitely be digging into those resources later, but for now, let's imagine a scenario. You need to close a wound. Right then and there, you're the first responder. What do you do?
Okay, getting a little intense now. Wound closure, like stitches. Can we actually do that on our own?
You absolutely can, and it's not as scary as it sounds. Sutures are important, sure, but, for smaller wounds, butterfly bandages can be a lifesaver.
I've seen those mentioned, butterfly bandages. What exactly are they?
So there are these little adhesive strips. They pull the skin together to close a wound. Think of them like a less intimidating version of stitches. Way easier to manage.
Interesting. Are they as
Yeah.
good as regular stitches?
For some wounds, absolutely. Especially clean cuts, ones that aren't under a ton of pressure. It all comes down to assessing the wound properly.
This is definitely making me realize how helpful some basic medical training would be.
100%. Even a basic first aid and CPR course can be a game changer. And there's so much out there now if you want to learn more, like suturing.
Yeah, like books, online courses, maybe even some in-person workshops.
You got it. It's amazing how accessible this stuff is now. Okay, let's switch gears for a sec. Talk about managing prescriptions, another crucial part of being prepared.
Oh, for sure. It's easy to forget about, but so important, especially if you need daily meds.
Absolutely. It's got to be part of the plan. Talk to your doctor, see if they'll work with you on having a little extra on hand, just in case.
Makes sense. Are there limits on that, though, for
Whoa.
certain medications?
Yeah, there are definitely some regulations, but having even a week or two extra can make all the difference.
Now, I've seen some stuff online about those fish antibiotics. What's the deal with those?
Okay, so that's one of those things that sounds good in theory, but you got to be super careful. Some fish antibiotics do have the same active ingredients as human meds, but the dosages are different.
Got it. So definitely not recommending anyone self-medicate with fish antibiotics.
Absolutely not. Always talk to your doctor, get the right prescriptions, never mess around with that stuff.
Always good advice.
Yeah.
Speaking of things we should be thinking about, let's talk about dental care.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a toothache on a regular day is bad enough, right? But if things go south, it can become a really serious problem.
For sure. So besides the obvious toothbrush and toothpaste, what else?
Dental cement. It's a lifesaver for temporary fillings, until you can get to a dentist.
Dental cement. Okay. You don't see that in your average first aid kit.
True, but so worth having. A little prevention goes a long way with your teeth.
I hear that. One of these articles mentioned a book, Where There Is No Dentist. I'm thinking I need to check that out.
Great book, a classic for a reason. We've been talking about the physical stuff, but let's not forget the mental and emotional side of emergencies.
It's easy to get caught up in all the gear, but mental health is just as important, for sure. How do we even start to prepare for that?
Well, first, you got to recognize that stress and anxiety, it's all normal in those situations. It's okay to feel those things.
It's a good point, just acknowledging those feelings instead of trying to ignore them.
Exactly. Don't underestimate the power of connection either. Your support system, your people, that's huge.
It's like we're in this together, right?
Yeah.
Knowing you're not alone makes a difference.
Right. Think about what helps you deal with stress, like mindfulness, maybe journaling, creative stuff. Those are valuable tools.
Put your own oxygen mask on first,
Yeah.
right? You can't help anyone else if you're not doing okay.
You got it. And if you have existing conditions, have a plan for those too.
So like a list of resources, support groups, important numbers, just having that can be helpful.
Exactly. Be proactive. And if you're on meds for that, treat those like any other essential prescription. Talk to your doctor.
Be prepared, not scared, right? Speaking of being prepared, one thing I think we need to talk about more is sanitation. It doesn't get enough attention.
Oh man, sanitation is huge. And you're right, it's often overlooked. But in a grid down situation, it can literally be life or death.
It's easy to focus on gear, but if you're not staying healthy, it's all for nothing. We're talking about preventing diseases, right?
Exactly. Waterborne illnesses, food contamination, infected wounds, they all become major threats without good sanitation.
So hand washing, not just a good habit, but a survival skill.
You got it. And it goes for everything. Personal hygiene, food prep, waste disposal, it all matters.
So having a plan for sanitation is just as important as having a plan for like shelter or water.
Now you're thinking. It's all connected. One of the biggest things is having a designated sanitation area, especially when you've got a group.
Right, you don't want to be caught off guard when nature calls, especially if you can't just flush and forget.
Exactly. Distance is your friend.
And simple tools are key, right? A shovel, a bucket, trash bags, they can go a long way.
Totally. Don't overthink it. And of course, hand sanitizer and soap are at the top of the list, always.
Non-negotiable. Would bleach or water purification tablets be good additions to that sanitation kit too?
Definitely worth considering, especially if clean water is going to be hard to come by.
This is making me realize medical preparedness. It's so much more than just treating injuries. It's about creating an environment where you can actually be healthy.
Now you're getting it. And speaking of creating a healthy environment, let's talk about something near and dear to my heart. How to do all of this on a budget.
Okay, this is where you shine. Medical supplies can get pricey, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed.
I know it can feel like a lot, but you don't have to break the bank to be prepared. Think like a bargain hunter. Essentials first, hunt for sales, and don't be afraid to think outside the box.
Love that. I'm all about a good bargain. Where should we start? What are the must-haves for our kits?
Can't go wrong with a solid first aid kit. It's your foundation for those everyday injuries, cuts, burns, scrapes. You can usually find pre-made kits at drugstores, but always double check what's inside and make sure it works for you.
What about the more, specialized items, like those trauma dressings or sutures? Those can be a little trickier to find and more expensive, too.
Yeah, for those, online retailers or medical supply stores are your best bet. You can find some deals online, especially if you buy in bulk or when there's a sale.
Bulk buying, of course. Is there anything you don't buy in bulk?
You know me so well. But seriously, it really makes a difference, especially for those items with a long shelf life.
True. Like bandages, gauze, antiseptic wipes. Those make sense. What about the more specialized stuff, like surgical tools? Where do we even begin with those?
For those, start with the basics. A good pair of scissors, tweezers, maybe a suture kit if you're feeling adventurous.
A suture kit. Where would we even find one of those? Asking for a friend, of course.
Believe it or not, you can actually find them online, even at some sporting goods stores. Just make sure you're getting it from a reputable brand and that it comes with everything you need, needles, sutures, maybe even one of those practice skin pads, so you can, get some practice in.
Practice makes perfect, or at least less intimidating when you're faced with a real wound.
That's right. Now, medications can be a little trickier, obviously.
Definitely. We always want to be safe and legal.
Of course. But there are ways to be prepared and stay on the right side of the law.
So, what are your go-to tips for building that budget-friendly medical stash, especially when it comes to medications?
Talk to your doctor. It's all about communication. Tell them about your preparedness goals. See if they'll work with you. Maybe they can write a prescription for a larger quantity or even suggest over-the-counter options.
It's all about communication. I'm sensing a theme here.
You got it. Be upfront with your doctor. They can be a huge help.
That's super helpful. What about for those of us who rely on over-the-counter medications? How do we stock up without emptying our wallets?
Generics, my friend. Generics are your best friend. In many cases, they work just as well as the name brands, and they're way easier on the wallet.
I do love a good generic, but I'll admit, sometimes I wonder if I'm sacrificing quality for the lower price.
I hear you. But honestly, in most cases, those generic medications have to meet the same standards as the name brands. They're just as safe and effective.
Okay, you've convinced me. Generics it is. Any other tips for saving on those over-the-counter meds?
Sales. Sales, sales, sales. Always be on the lookout for sales. Check those weekly ads, online deals. You can find some great discounts, especially on pain relievers and allergy meds.
And don't forget coupon apps. Those are a lifesaver for the budget conscious.
Yes, digital coupons are your friend. Every little bit counts.
Okay, I'm ready to grab my coupons and hit the drugstore. Any other budget-friendly advice for our listeners?
Don't rule out natural remedies. Now, I'm not saying ditch all conventional medicine and go all natural, but there are some great natural alternatives out there that can be really helpful, especially for those minor issues.
Like that clove oil we talked about. For toothaches.
Exactly. Clove oil, tea tree oil, even honey, they all have antibacterial and soothing properties.
It's great to have options.
Right. And knowledge is power, my friend. The more you learn about different treatment options, the more prepared you'll be.
So we've covered a lot on the physical side of things, but let's circle back to mental health. It's just as important, especially when things get tough.
Couldn't agree more. We can't talk about being prepared without addressing the mental and emotional side of emergencies.
It's easy to get caught up in the logistics, food, water, shelter, all that.
Mhm.
But if we're not taking care of ourselves mentally and emotionally, it's all for nothing.
Exactly. Stress, anxiety, even fear, those are all normal reactions in those situations. And if the crisis lasts a while, it can really wear you down, both mentally and physically.
So how do we prepare for that? Is it as simple as like downloading a meditation app?
I wish it were that easy. It's a bit more involved. First, you have to accept that mental health is just as important as physical health. And just like you'd have a plan for a physical injury, you need a plan for those mental and emotional challenges.
Okay, that makes sense. So what does that plan look like? How do we actually do that?
Start with yourself. Figure out what stresses you out, what your triggers are, what throws you off balance.
That's a good question. For me, it's lack of sleep and feeling out of control.
Okay, good. Once you know those triggers, you can find ways to deal with them, find coping mechanisms that work for you.
So if I know lack of sleep makes me, let's say, a little more irritable, I can make sure that I prioritize getting enough sleep, even if it's tough.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Even packing earplugs and an eye mask in your emergency kit can help you get some decent sleep, even if it's noisy or chaotic.
Those are great practical tips. What about managing anxiety? I feel like a lot of people struggle with that, especially in uncertain times.
Totally. There are so many things you can try. Some people like deep breathing or meditation. Others prefer journaling or listening to calming music. It's all about finding what works for you.
It's personal, right? We all have our own ways of coping.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment. What works for one person might not work for another. Just have a few different tools in your mental toolbox, so to speak.
A toolkit for your mind.
That's
Yeah.
it. And just like any toolkit, make sure it's stocked with the right stuff for you.
We've talked about self-care, which is so important. But what about taking care of others? During a crisis, we need to look out for each other.
Absolutely. Honestly, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just listen. Really listen.
Sometimes all you need is someone to talk to, someone who will actually listen, without judgment.
100%. And never underestimate the power of touch. A hug, a pat on the back, holding someone's hand, it can go a long way.
It's about that human connection, right? Feeling like you're not alone.
That's it. And if you're able to, offer practical help.
Like helping to set up camp, make some food, even just watching the kids so someone can have a break.
Exactly. Share the load, both physically and emotionally.
It's about being there for each other.
You got it. Now let's talk about something that can be tough to talk about. Death and dying.
Okay, yeah, that took a turn. But I get why it's important.
In a crisis, especially a long one, there's a real possibility of loss. Loved ones, community, even just our way of life.
It's a reality, but not one we can ignore.
Right, and it might seem like a downer, but having a plan for if someone dies can actually be helpful, practically and emotionally.
Practically, as in knowing how to handle a body respectfully and safely.
Yes. And emotionally, having thought about how you would want to honor that person, even in a crisis, it's important.
It makes sense to have those conversations beforehand, even if they're hard. It could make things a little easier if the worst were to happen.
Exactly. It's about being prepared for all possibilities. Okay, let's shift gears for a moment. Talk about something a little more upbeat, building your medical skills.
Okay, I'm all for that. What kind of skills are we talking about?
We've touched on some first aid, CPR, wound care, but there's always more to learn.
Those are all important, but I'm guessing there's a lot more to it than just knowing how to put on a bandage.
Oh, for sure. The more you know about how the body works, how to handle those common injuries and illnesses, the better off you'll be.
Knowledge is power, right?
Uh,
Less fear when you know what to do.
Exactly. And the great thing is, it's a lifelong journey. You can always learn more.
Where do we start? If someone is just starting out, what should they focus on?
Learning how to assess a situation and provide basic first aid, those are essential skills.
Right, like knowing how to control bleeding, what to do for burns, or even how to splint a broken bone. Those can be life-saving.
You got it. And luckily, there are tons of resources out there, classes, books, online videos, you name it.
It's amazing how accessible this kind of information is. No matter what your budget is or how you like to learn, there's something out there for everyone.
That's the beauty of it. And don't forget about practicing what you learn. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
Find a willing volunteer, a very patient pet, whatever it takes.
Exactly. Rome wasn't built in a day. Take it one step at a time.
One step at a time. Okay, speaking of taking steps, what about building a medical network? What does that even mean?
It's a great point, and people don't talk about it enough. I'm talking about doctors and nurses, anyone with medical knowledge, but also people with other useful skills.
So we're thinking beyond our immediate circle.
Exactly. Think about your community, people with specialized skills, herbalists, EMTs, even someone who's amazing at gardening or preserving food. Everyone has something to offer.
It's like a community skill swap. Everyone brings their expertise to the table.
Now you're getting it. And the best time to build those relationships is now, not when disaster strikes.
Because it's probably not a great time to make new friends when you're in the middle of a hurricane.
To say the least. Join a preparedness group, go to a workshop, or even just start a conversation with someone at the farmer's market.
It's about building those connections, that trust, because you just never know when you might need it.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to share what you know, too. A strong network is a two-way street.
It's about that give and take. That's what makes a community strong.
You said it. And those relationships, they add so much to your life, even beyond preparedness.
It's about creating a community that can withstand anything.
Exactly. Speaking of withstanding, let's talk about personal hygiene. It's something that's so essential, especially long-term.
Personal hygiene, the foundation of good health. It's important every day, but in a crisis, it's crucial.
Right. It's easy to let things slide when you're stressed, but honestly, it's one of the simplest yet most effective ways to stay healthy.
So, the basics are still important. Hand washing, showering, brushing our teeth, all the things mom and dad taught us.
You got it. They might seem basic, but if you're in a survival situation, access to clean water and sanitation might be limited. So these simple things become even more important.
Right. It's one thing to be a little dirty, but it's another thing entirely. When you have a compromised immune system or you can't see a doctor, infections can turn serious fast.
Exactly. So hand washing, non-negotiable, and when soap and water are hard to come by, hand sanitizer is your new best friend.
And never leave home without it. What about showering? That feels like it might be a luxury in a survival situation.
It can be, yeah. But it's worth it. Even a quick sponge bath with some soap and water. It's good for your mental health, too.
It's about feeling human again when things are tough.
Exactly. And don't forget those pearly whites. Brushing twice a day, it seems small, but it can prevent so many problems. Cavities, gum disease, infections.
Toothbrush, toothpaste, check and check. Any other hygiene essentials we should add to the list?
For sure. Keep your hair clean, nails trimmed. And for the ladies, feminine hygiene products, super important.
Because unfortunately, Mother Nature doesn't care if there's an emergency.
Nope, it's just about being prepared.
This has been such a good reminder that medical preparedness is about so much more than bandages and antibiotics. It's about having a plan that covers everything.
Now you're getting it. Even small steps can make a huge difference. Just start somewhere.
We've talked a lot about being prepared at home, but what about when we have to evacuate? What changes then?
Oh, that's huge. You got to plan for that, too. Your bug-out bag, it needs to be light, easy to carry, but still have everything you need for those on-the-go emergencies.
So what are our top priorities for that mobile medical kit? What's absolutely essential?
Think about the most likely injuries you'd get during an evacuation. Blisters, sprains, cuts, those are common. And in a worst-case scenario, even think about trauma.
So we're talking bandages, antiseptics, pain relievers. Those seem like no-brainers. What about the more serious stuff, like tourniquets or sutures? Should those be in there too?
Yeah, they're worth considering for sure, especially if you think you might be somewhere without access to medical care. It's a balancing act, right? You want to be prepared, but not so weighed down that you can't move.
Exactly. And medications, we touched on that, but it seems even more important when you're away from home.
It's critical. If you need prescriptions, having a supply in that bug-out bag is non-negotiable.
And I'm guessing keeping a copy of those prescriptions in there is a good idea too, just in case.
So smart. You never know when you might need to get a refill while you're on the move.
It's all about thinking ahead. We've covered so much today, from those essential medical supplies to sanitation. It's been amazing. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners as we wrap up?
Remember, the best medical kit in the world won't do you any good if you don't know how to use it. Invest in yourself. Learn those skills. Take a first aid course, read a book, practice. The more you know, the more confident you'll be no matter what happens.
Love it. We've thrown a lot of information at you today, but remember, knowledge is power.
You've given everyone a lot to think about, a lot to work with. I hope everyone feels empowered to take those next steps.
Exactly. Start small, build your kit, learn as you go, connect with others. Preparedness is a journey. Until next time, stay curious and stay prepared.